You are listening to the Mountainside Podcast, and our guest for this episode is from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, returning guest, Wildlife Officer Scott Murdoch. This was a great conversation. I always enjoy having Colorado Parks and Wildlife in the studio to help educate myself and our listeners on some day-to-day use in the backcountry, living with wildlife. We cover so much on these episodes, and these are some of my favorite ones to do, and hopefully you as the listener are getting something out of it. All right, are you ready to get after this, man? We're not. We're just going to freeform it. Short notice, we'll get it rolling here. So, Scott, thanks for coming back in, man. I always enjoy having you guys in here. And for this episode specifically, I'm going to try to refrain from using bad language and stuff, so maybe CPW can use it someplace.
There you go.
I think that's been the issue in the past is I'm so used to having my rock and roll buddies in here, former operators. Sometimes there's some whiskey flowing, so the lips get a little bit loose, you know?
Sure.
So we're going to make this one at least PG-13.
There you go.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm going to do my best. You can catch me too. We'll
There you
bleep
go.
it out or something. How you been, man? What's
Been well.
coming
Been real
off
well.
of a hunting season? Crazy
Yeah.
time of year for you guys, I'm sure.
Yeah, kind of the lull. You know, we got second season starting here in a couple days. First season wasn't horribly busy. We had a few things going on. First season's usually pretty mild, but now that we get deer season and the elk season combined, you get lots more guys out there. It's just a bit more chaotic for sure.
I'm sure.
And then of course we had antelope season earlier on, and I kind of try to hunt a little bit kind of in some of these off seasons or with different tags that kind of are separate from kind of the general tag, if you will. And there's not a lot of downtime for sure.
Yeah. So between you hunting and your job, you are full on. And for people that haven't listened to us before, this is your third time on the podcast. So thanks for coming back, man.
Absolutely.
I always enjoy having you guys. I guess let's just run through your job description a little bit. It would be a game warden, right? And then you can dive into a little bit more of your responsibilities and stuff for people that are just tuning into this that haven't listened to prior episodes.
Sure. So I work for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and my title is technically called a District Wildlife Manager. So we're basically a commissioned wildlife officer. You might hear us call game wardens, conservation officers. It's all kind of one and the same. Here in Colorado, we have kind of a diverse, I guess a pretty diverse role. We deal with both law enforcement, as well as the biological aspect of things. And so we are all biologists as well as law enforcement officers, and we have the same authority as state trooper or deputy. Our focus, however, happens to be on Title 33, which is wildlife law. Since we're also biologists, we do a lot of the biological surveys, deer and elk counts and classifications, fish electroshocking or sampling, weighing and measuring all the fish, doing goat counts, helicopter classifications, ground counts, all types of different things. We help with the license setting. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot on your guys' plates. Not to mention, and we've brought this up before, but the areas that you guys cover that are one wildlife agent is responsible for is pretty vast.
Yeah, it is. In and around kind of some of these more urban areas, the Denver area, Conifer, Evergreen, our districts tend to be a little bit smaller just because we have so many more people. And with those additional people, we get a lot more, nuisance wildlife complaints, bear complaints, deer caught in fences, stuff like that. And so that takes a lot of our time. And so we have a little bit smaller districts, but some of the more rural districts out in the eastern plains or in the western part of the state are, 2, 3, 4 times bigger than my current district here in Conifer. So, but yeah, it's a lot of ground, and even with the small districts, I mean, there's days I don't see one end to the other, and there's usually just a couple guys per county really. So it's not a lot of coverage.
Yeah, and the counties here in the state of Colorado can be pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, Jefferson County's huge.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
For a county, it's pretty big. How often do you guys get complaints on wildlife, like there's a bear in my trash at night or whatever the most common things are?
Sure. So seasonality plays a big role into what kind of calls that we're getting. But usually it's daily we're getting multiple calls. And I would say over the last 10, 12, 15 years, we're really seeing more and more of those types of calls and complaints just because you're getting more and more people that are working from home. You're getting more people that are living in kind of these semi-rural areas. We get more and more of the ring cameras and trail cameras on people's property, and so now they're seeing the wildlife that's been there all along. And so people are just much more familiar with that type of thing. But we get lots and lots of calls. On my days that I'm on call, so we've got an officer that's on call every day, and that person basically is going to respond to any types of calls that are really pertinent for that particular day or night. And there's days where sometimes we'll get 1, 2, 3 calls. There's some days you get 20 plus, and it turns into a 18 or 20 hour day. So those are not the probably the norm, but they're becoming much more common, unfortunately.
I mean, we've seen a huge turn over here where we live on the Front Range, specifically on just people leaving the state of Colorado that have lived here for a long time, and then people moving in from other states that haven't dealt with wildlife or have lived in an inner city or something like that. Do you find that most commonly these calls are coming from those people specifically, or you think it's a increase in the technology? And I mean, because I guess for me growing up here, if a bear gets in our trash, first of all, we have those bear locking trash cans, which they can still open.
Sure. Oh yeah.
So I just go out and clean up the trash and then move it into the garage. Or whatever, right? Like That's my bad for leaving the trash can out. It should be inside garage or something, right? And then I go about my day. I don't call you guys and be like, hey, there was a bear in my yard last night.
Sure.
How often are those calls coming in like that? Or is it more of a safety concern?
It's probably the whole range, really. And I think to get back to your first statement of, is it people that have moved here? I would say that's probably a big component of it. I would say probably a lot of the natives or folks that have lived here for some time. They've been educated. They know. They kind of know the routine and what to do and how to live with wildlife. But we get more and more folks that have come here, and they get to the mountains, and then they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize there was bears and mountain lions in my backyard." Right. And so that's a pretty big shock to them. Or they're from a state where they're feeding deer down in Texas, and so they come down here to Colorado, and I'm going to put out my salt block like I did in Texas. And I would say the vast majority of our nuisance calls that we deal with really revolve around education versus actual law enforcement efforts. I mean, we certainly go down that road if we have to. But we like to kind of start with the basics at first and try and educate folks and say, hey, this is, the most appropriate response for this type of action. We don't mind getting those calls and trying to educate folks. We would prefer to address the situation before it becomes a big issue. Some of these folks don't understand that you do need to secure your trash, or don't put your trash out the night before. Put your trash out the day of trash day. Stuff like that, which might seem common sense to you or I, but if you're not living in and amongst wildlife your whole life, that's just not probably the first thing that pops into your mind. We really just educate. We do some talks with realtors in the area, trying to educate the realtors so that they can try and educate prospective home buyers. Obviously a lot of that's kind of slowing down with home purchases and stuff like that, but certainly there's still plenty of people moving in and around these communities.
Not to mention we have more subdivisions going in these rural areas to meet that demand, right? Because
Sure.
there's a lot of people that want to live here.
Yep.
There's a lot of people that want to live in rural spaces now. So we're building more and we're taking more habitat probably from a lot of these animals. So they're going to naturally be pushed into subdivided areas, I would imagine, right?
Absolutely. You think about like our national forests or some of the more rural or remote parts of conifer and evergreen. I would say the vast majority of them, the timber and the forests are pretty overgrown. They're thick. There's not a lot of good food in there. It's great shelter, but it's not good food or forage habitat for a lot of our deer and elk. But in and around the subdivisions, everybody's thinned their property out, where they've planted ornamentals or fruit trees, something like that. And really, it's a perfect...
the golf course.
Exactly. Perfect feeding area for these animals. And so they'll refuge in areas on open space or national forest, and then they'll kind of come into these subdivisions and feed in the evenings or mornings. So it's a perfect situation to have people and wildlife interacting.
Yeah, it happens on a regular basis up here. I mean, I don't know how many times I live right by the golf course, especially in the fall, that there's people out there playing golf, and there'll be a 300 to 400 class bull out there, tearing up the green or whatever he's doing,
Sure.
in the middle of the rut.
Yep.
So I guess, and the animals around here are more used to people because they're around them all the time. So how often do you guys have a call in a residential area like this where it's an actual attack or a problem with some sort of wildlife actually injuring a person? I mean, is it very seldom, or does it happen on a regular basis?
It's not super common. For as many people that are in and around wildlife, it's surprisingly low. In particular for bears and mountain lions. It's far lower for bears and lions than it is for deer and elk. We probably have more people that are hurt by deer and elk and moose here in Colorado than bears and lions.
Moose are a big one, huh?
Yeah, without a doubt. Not so much around here, but with our moose population increasing, that's certainly a bigger risk to folks, especially the folks that are higher elevation, walking their dogs off leash in particular. That's going to be a potential risk for those people.
It actually happened to me bow hunting this year. I came up on a bull and didn't even really, I mean, they're so big and I'm not used to being on the lookout for them.
Sure.
And I kind of was going up this ravine and we crossed paths and there was really no place for me to go.
Mm-hmm.
And he stared at me for a minute and it wasn't, you could just tell, right? Like you get that sort of like sense of, if you've been around enough elk or in the rut or anything like that, and I haven't been around a ton of moose, but in the past couple of years, I've seen more moose than I've seen elk in some of these spots where I go bow hunting,
Mm-hmm.
And that was a scary moment for a second. I think I didn't know what I was going to do, honestly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They can be really intimidating. I mean, one, they're massive.
Yeah. Huge.
Even a cow can be substantially larger than an elk, and you're not going to outrun them. They look like they should be clumsy animals.
They're not.
They're super athletic. Really
and especially
athletic.
the bulls. And I've seen a ton of cows, but it's very seldom that I run into a bull. And this year I did. Luckily he wasn't huge and super aggressive, because I think it would have been a different story, because I was maybe 30 yards from him before I realized.
Yeah. Well, and they just
there.
don't have that same fright response. They're more designed to hold their ground, stand their ground, right. Whereas a deer or an elk, the second they see or smell you, boom, they're gone, especially in a more wild environment, maybe not so much around conifer and evergreen. But,
right.
Yep.
What time of year do they rut? Is it around
same time,
the same as elk?
Yeah. Yep. Usually kind of that first week of October, they're getting into it pretty good. So.
Yeah, I heard a couple bulls going at it, man, and you would have thought it was like a WWE match
right
up there when I was up, because it was just dead silent. And then they do that crazy kind of type of call. It's not anything that I'm used to. I'm used to hearing elk bugles, which kind of sounds like Jurassic Park if you've never experienced it before. Like, we have this awesome couple that moved in behind us from Maryland.
Okay.
And there's a couple nights where the bulls will be literally like right outside your window coming off the golf course, and just, you know, if they're in the full on rut and fighting all night,
Yep.
they're screaming, and it sounds like there's a velociraptor outside your window.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, Max and them, shout out to Max. He was like, "Oh my God, did you hear that last night?" I was like, "Yeah, it's pretty normal a couple times a year, you know, it's pretty epic." And he was like, "That was so cool." You know, they're just excited about it. So,
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I never get enough of it.
I don't either, man. I don't know what it is. I guess you could call me an alcoholic or something like that, because I love going out and photographing them too. Is one of my favorite things to do.
Sure.
Is getting some still images of them. And I love being around it. But I love being up with my bow too. I had an awesome season this season, just, you know, calling and all that sort of stuff. I actually, I was kind of telling you prior to this, where I went up, I went 2 different open game units this year, but one day I went up and I saw a cat, and that's the first time I've seen a cat, I think, in the wild, like where I've actually been on foot.
Sure.
And I'm almost positive it was a mountain lion. I can't really tell because it was just in my peripheral, and I saw it take off, and I saw a tail. So
Oh, yeah.
I would imagine it was a cat. And I was cow calling him probably 2 miles up this trail before I saw it. So
Sure.
I would imagine it was coming into my stupid cow call, which isn't very good. But
Yep. There's that. I mean, we've got no shortage of cats, you know, and we get lots of calls every fall, winter in particular, around Confer and Evergreen, of people surprised that they're starting to see lions in and around the communities. And I mean, if there's deer, guaranteed you got mountain lions. And,
yeah.
and you know, we track all of our mountain lion and bear reports and sightings. You know, so if somebody does call me, I've got an app on my phone that'll pull up, and I'll record that. And, you know, that's just kind of one way that we kind of keep tabs on kind of current things that are going on. And you'd be amazed where we see mountain lions, Eastern Plains and downtown Denver, and
Downtown Denver?
all over the place. Like
Really?
that South Platte corridor,
Yeah.
and the Bear Creek corridor, the Clear Creek corridor, Boulder Creek. I mean, all of those, just those animals are moving up and down those constantly. You know, and there's critters all over the place. Yeah.
So has there ever been a mountain lion problem in the actual like downtown, like Lodo area or 16th Street Mall or anything?
I don't
like
know.
that?
I don't know. I don't work down there, but when we look at our app, we certainly have sightings
Really?
along the South Platte. So,
Wow.
yep.
So do you start to see a trend? Like, I know a lot of these animals are migratory, and I know, like, for a fact, especially with the elk, there's one particular bull that I've been photographing for at least 6 to 7 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes back and I can recognize him, and each year he gets older, and his rack's either bigger or smaller depending on how much rain we've had. And like,
Sure.
but I'm 99% positive it's the same bull.
Sure.
So when you start to have a problem with a bear or a cat or some of these predators, do they tend to be repeat offenders, or once they've found like a food source? Like, I know with bears specifically, once they've found garbage, I've heard rumors that they'll come back for like 6 years or something looking for that food source again. Like,
They certainly can. A lot of times it depends on the individual, and then it depends on what kind of natural food sources are available. So if there's a lot of natural food available, many of those bears, even if there's good trash sources available, they're going to go and forage naturally. Same thing like with people. Some people like to be in and around, and like, you know, they don't mind the crowds. A lot of people like to be by themselves. I you know, especially with bears, it feels like some of them certainly tolerate people. You know, they don't care. You know, they'll walk out in the middle of town during the day, and other bears, you know, they are seldom even seen in that area at night. You know, we've put collars on these bears in other parts of the state, and we've tracked them as they kind of come in and out of town. And, you know, if natural forage is good, that's their preferred food source overall. You know, we're going to have individuals that are going to be just trash bears, kind of no matter what. So it's kind of a individual thing. But, you know, we really pray for that early moisture in the spring, and hopefully we don't get any late frosts. This year we had a late frost that killed a lot of the acorn production, so that was kind of a bummer. But overall, we had pretty good berry production late in the summer, so that was certainly helpful.
This seemed like it was a wet summer to me. I mean,
it was.
Yeah, and you could tell by looking at the elk and deer, they were in the velvet a little bit longer and just bigger racks. It was nice antlers, you know?
Yep. Yeah, I think we had a pretty good year overall. From a bear perspective, we had probably a pretty decent amount of complaints compared to some other years. But it seemed to be focused, Evergreen and then up towards Idaho Springs area. It seemed to be kind of our hot spots this year.
And as far as bear population goes, because when did they outlaw spring bear hunting?
I think that was in 92.
Oh, was it that far back?
Maybe 95.
Wow.
I can't say for sure. But I think it was in the 90s.
We don't have Sarah here to
Right.
Google that for us today, so I'm not going to dive into it. But yeah, I didn't realize. Man, it's almost... I just realized the other day how old I was when they were talking about the Broncos' 25-year anniversary of their first Super Bowl win. I was like, wait a minute,
Right.
That doesn't seem like that long ago, I was like, oh man, I'm getting old.
Yep.
But yeah, I guess that was 20 some years ago. How much have we seen the bear population grow? I know, looking at the hunting regs every year and starting to see those bear paws in there, and your guys' emphasis, or Colorado Parks and Wildlife's emphasis on encouraging guys to get bear tags and making it much more attainable for them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously the population's probably larger than it's been in 20 some years, right? And that might be why we're having some of these issues.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we have a lot of bears without question. And probably the biggest challenge is that the bears are in places that we can't necessarily hunt. We have not a lot of great tools in order to manage bears. Certainly we have Parks and Wildlife can set traps or relocate or move bears or put down bears that are either depredating or breaking in homes or attacking people. But that's not something we want to do, nor is it a real, productive use of our time. There's a lot of other things that we could be doing that would be more efficient with our, more productive as far as the total number of things that we have on our plates. And really, we use hunting as a management tool. And so if we can get hunters to harvest bears, that's the preference, right? The challenge is that our window is such a narrow one, right? We can't hunt till September 2nd. 50% of our bears are in hibernation by October 15th. And then by Thanksgiving, they're pretty much all in hibernation. And so we've got a real narrow window, and then we're kind of done. And so many of these bears are not necessarily on national forest. The ones that are on national forest where most of the hunters are at aren't the ones that are causing problems.
Man, and they're so stealth and hard to see. They're like lions. I don't run into them very often.
No, you get a little dusting of snow in September, and you're like, man, there's bear tracks all over the place, but you seldom see them.
They're so quiet too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, they're hard to hunt. They're real hard to hunt. They've got such a good nose. If they smell you, they're gone. Managing bears or reducing population size through hunting, that's ultimately our goal. But as well as I do, in and around Conifer Evergreen, good luck harvesting a bear because so many of these properties are so small, and the bears aren't generally where the hunting is.
I would say all the properties
on.
are anywhere from 5 to half acres, right? Like for the majority. There might be a few outliers there. Yeah, no, that's a tough thing to manage, and I just hope that in the future it doesn't actually hinder the bear, right? Because at some point they're going to outgrow their habitat.
Yeah, well, and we see increased road kills. We see increased human conflicts, which often result in a bear being put down. And those are all direct mortalities that could have been somebody's bear that somebody harvested, through hunting. So ultimately, that would have been our preference is to have somebody harvest a bear. But when you have high densities and lots of people, lots of roads, you get increased road strikes. You get, we get
We just had a big one up here, right? On 73.
We've had a few on 73 already this year, or on 74. I think
it was
we've
a
had
big
2 or 3.
bear. Like I was taking my kid to his football game in the morning. I was like, oh man, that's a big, like a 400-pound bear. It looked like.
Yeah, we've had quite a few this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's too bad.
So.
I don't know that you can speak on this or answer it. If you don't want to answer it, just tell me. But
Sure.
Do you ever anticipate, and I know that this is kind of the issue with everything going to the ballot box, right? Because now people that are not biologists, in my opinion, are playing a role in biology.
Correct.
Depending on whether they check yes or no on a box, right?
Yep.
Do you ever anticipate that we could get spring bear hunting back? Or it seems like once, and I don't know if it's party related, I'm sure it is, but once an initiative is passed or a law is passed, it seems like there's no going back, especially in the hunting side of things. Do you anticipate that? Do you ever see that the bear population could get so big that we may have to implement spring bear hunting again to manage it, or some baiting or dogs, or some of these old ways that they used to hunt bears?
Yeah, so I think that's part of the strategy of folks that want to get these types of things banned or kind of reined in, is that in this instance, this was a constitutional amendment, and amending the Constitution is very difficult. And I think they've since passed another.
Not to mention the money involved.
Sure. I think they passed another deal where to change the Constitution, it's actually quite a bit more difficult than historically it used to be, which I think in the grand scheme of things is probably a good thing. But in order to change things that are currently on the Constitution, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes not just a majority, but more than a majority in order to change that. And that's going to come from the people. Somebody has to put out, basically a ballot initiative, a constitutional amendment, in order to reverse that.
That's insane.
And
I
so
didn't realize it was at that level.
Yeah, so Parks and Wildlife doesn't have any ability to do that. The legislature doesn't have the ability to do that. It's through the voters and the constitutional amendment change, and so that's where it's at. The voters voted for that, and that's kind of where we stand. And so we operate within the framework of what we can do. And so we can start season September 2nd. We can operate within that framework. We can't hunt with bears. We can't hunt with dogs. We can't hunt with bait. Like it or not, that's what we're bound to, and that's what my job is, to enforce and make sure that hunters are following that framework. Ultimately, we want hunters to be as successful as we can, because we do need that harvest.
Relying on those numbers, right?
But we also have to follow the rules, right? And so that's one of our challenges, is that, we want to have harvest, but we also want it to be done the way and within the boundaries of the law. So,
which makes sense, because it's the only way to really control it, right?
Sure.
You have to be educated. Number one is the hunter. And then you have to have you guys for the checks and balances, I believe. Like, I don't think there's any other way around it.
Yep.
When it comes to, I guess, some of these other predator issues that have been at the ballot box, like reintroducing wolves, I know we've talked about that, and it's something that I'm curious about. Or let's say, because I still believe, I don't know, I'm not a lion hunter, but you can still hunt lions with dogs, right? And it's really the only way to have any sort of success in my eyes.
Yeah, there would be very little harvest of mountain lions if we didn't have that tool. Yeah. We do need that tool in order to manage lion populations. whether it's from a strictly conflict standpoint between people and lions or lions and livestock. That's a great tool in order to manage that. Not only that, it's exciting, it's fun, it's good recreation. It serves our purpose of managing populations. We don't want to have too many lions that reduce deer and elk populations, but we also don't want to have too few lions that don't help balance some of that predator-prey interaction too, right? They're an important part of our landscape. We need to manage them. One of the things that people often kind of overlook is that, they kind of want, the West as it was 200 or 300 years ago. Lots of, let predators control all of our wildlife populations. Well, the West is not what it was. We've got highways and subdivisions and all of these other conflicting issues, not to mention, 6 or 7 million people in Colorado. And so this is not necessarily a natural environment anymore. And so humans are an integral part of the ecosystem at this point. And so, we as wildlife managers have to take in that human component as part of the management of our wildlife. And so, we value the mountain lions, we value the bears and other critters on that landscape, but we need to have those tools in order to manage the wildlife. And I would say a lot of folks, even when it comes to the wolf issue, we need tools in order to manage those animals. If we've got conflicts, if we've got overabundance, having those tools in order to manage it is critically important because when those are removed, that's when we really struggle to manage the population. And hunting is our primary way in order to manage populations of all species here in Colorado. And really, if you look at it, we don't hunt all that many species. We've got 960 species of wildlife here in Colorado, and we hunt just a very kind of select few. And a lot of our management is kind of hands off on a lot of other types of species. Birds in particular, and a lot of other smaller animals, mammals, and amphibians, reptiles, stuff like that. Yep. But yeah, hunting is a excellent management tool and one that we like to have that opportunity to be flexible with both season dates and methods and stuff like that. So.
And it's kind of wild, now that I think about it, a lot of the times these ballot initiatives always pertain to predators. Like they're not trying to reintroduce bison. You know what I mean? Like free range bison, that's never been on the ballot. Or there's not activist groups out there like bring the bison back type of thing. So it's kind of a weird thing. It's like this connection that we have with like almost these spiritual type animals, right? Or that... I guess animals that you kind of think are cool. And I think wolves are amazing, man. Like,
sure.
I think mountain lions are amazing. I'm totally intrigued by mountain lions, man. I have been since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that did it is I'm pretty sure a wildlife officer brought a lion into my elementary school as a kid.
Sure.
Right up here at Wilmot. Like, It was crazy. But anyways, I don't understand. I guess if we're going to do it, we need to do it on... If we're going to do this at the ballot box, there needs to be some sort of education, right? And this is the issue with voting, whether you're voting for wolves to come back or you're voting for Nancy Pelosi or, Donald Trump or whatever, right? It all comes down to education, what you know, what you think, that sort of thing. What's the best way, and maybe you don't have a suggestion for this, and I'm trying to figure it out myself, and I think it's a tricky question, but to actually get educated on an animal, a species, how do you know that you're listening to credible biologists? Because on both sides, they each have an agenda, right?
Sure.
So a lot of times these things are one-sided. We experienced it firsthand here on the podcast when I was kind of covering before we voted on the wolf initiative. I was trying to cover it from both sides. And I got thrown some curveballs by political parties, and it was hard, man. It was not an easy thing to do or navigate.
Yep. Yeah, like it or not, when you deal with wildlife management, right, we've got this human component. So obviously politics are going to be involved in the wildlife management. And I guess from my perspective and my role, right, my job is to kind of educate folks on the basic biology of this is the kind of the facts of, say, take feeding, for instance. This is what happens when you feed wildlife. These are the biological concerns that we have. We see population level effects, whether it's disease or other things that cause problems to that. And so my job is to try and kind of be somewhat unbiased regarding that.
And you guys have to be, right? Like, you guys can't be out picketing or putting stickers on your truck saying, like, vote yes on this or no on that, right?
Yeah,
like,
and that's not my role.
Right.
It's essentially, I think the public really just needs to look at both sides and just look with an open mind of both pro and against for whatever the situation might be. And then also kind of frame it with a kind of a, look at it from an outside perspective almost, don't take
try to look at the facts too. Cause I think that was one of the biggest things that I noticed with the wolf thing. Yep. Was like, there was all these crazy facts out there that some of them made no sense at all, that were pro wolf, and some of them made no sense at all that were anti wolf.
Sure.
So, I mean, there was on both sides, you have like almost like propaganda going on, right?
Sure.
Like some blatant lies. But then if you start looking at the actual facts and just what we know already from, and this pertains to just about any species, right? We have
absolutely.
to have some sort of management, just like you said, with predators.
Yeah, like it or not, wolves do play an important biological role on that ecosystem. And that statement isn't one pro-wolf or anti-wolf. That's just a factual statement that they have an important biological effect. Does that statement affect whether we're going to have conflicts with livestock and wolves? No, that's totally unrelated.
Yeah.
You also have to look at these types of situations without having that emotional reaction to it. And so much of our job deals with that emotional reaction because people have an emotional bond with wildlife. They see something amazing when they see, I'm sure you've experienced it on a bow hunt where you see a magnificent bull elk and like it's captivating. Like you just feel
all the time.
Feel a connection with that animal, and like you can. I've had situations where like, yeah, I'm not going to shoot that one. Like I something about it.
Yeah.
I could, but I don't. Or whatever, and that's the emotional connection that you might be experiencing with that type of situation. That might be somebody who sees a mountain lion go through their yard and they found it to be, a very moving experience, and now in that situation or in the future, they don't ever want to see mountain lions being hunted because they had such a magical experience in that instance.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Whereas somebody else maybe had 10 of their goats get killed by a mountain lion, and now they want every mountain lion to be killed, which both of those perspectives are kind of on the far ends of kind of on the far extremes of a general perception.
Which is
lions.
Basically why wildlife was decimated.
Mm-hmm.
To the point like with market hunting, well, number one, it was a food source, right?
Sure.
But then also at the same time, these people are trying to have livelihoods and their kids are getting eaten. And like, it was the Wild West,
Sure.
150 years ago. And that's why we don't have wolves here now, right?
Yeah, a lot of it was
they were eradicated.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Once the bison were killed out, the pelts from the wolves were highly prized. And so that was one of the big drivers of it. But then as cattle and stuff started moving across the West, right? Anything that affects your livelihood and eats your dollars, that's going to be eliminated. And so there's a lot of big challenges. Some folks don't want any predators on the landscape because of that potential conflict with livestock and other things, or the potential risk of people getting attacked or eaten. But then on the other side of things, there's other folks that don't want.
There's some people that don't want
care
elk.
about the livestock. They don't care about the livestock or
gotcha.
people that are in the ranching industry and the financial burden that a big predator will cause on that person. Not only time, but also the financial aspect of things too.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
It's a complicated thing, and I wish wildlife management was a cut and dry thing, but that's also why we have so many little tools for specific situations. And so the more tools a wildlife manager has, the better off we are at managing wildlife. And hunting is one of those important management tools.
I agree. And this is the thing that frustrates me is how, it ends up at the ballot box and out of the professional's hands. It's like going to a doctor and asking him to fix your car.
Sure.
Right? Like it just doesn't, that's not what you go to a doctor for, right? Nor is he probably going to know how to do it. So I think listening to biologists, getting the information, obviously if you see something, at the ballot box that pertains to wildlife in particular in your local region, I think it's important.
But I think that's also some of the strategy of some groups that aren't pro-hunting is that they want to utilize or captivate people based on the emotions in order to achieve what they need or what their personal agenda is. And it happens on both sides. This is not a right versus left thing. I mean, it's the fact is that both groups handle politics in one way to achieve their particular agendas.
So slimy. So slimy. Well, and even with like the wolf initiative, it was, so it passed. You might have to correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't have anybody here to fact check me. But from what I recall, when the actual votes came in, it passed, but there was going to be, wolves weren't on the endangered list at the time that was voted in. And then as soon as a new administration or a new party took office, then all of a sudden they were back. So I wonder how many people voted to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to vote because I know that they can at least manage it. I don't know if people even thought that far ahead.
Sure.
But I would imagine then, the next thing you know, it's almost like somebody pulling a fast one or something. It's like there's so many rabbit holes, and this is not what we talk about generally on here. And I don't want to burn up all of your time on here about that, but I just thought I'd ask. And if somebody wanted to reach out to Colorado Parks and Wildlife to get some education on a certain species or maybe something, how to live with wildlife, is there a way for people to do that? Do you encourage people to do that, or is that something?
Absolutely. The homeowners can reach out to their local officer. If they've got kind of an urgent matter that needs to be handled expediently, they can reach out through Colorado State Patrol. That's who dispatches us. They can get a hold of the on-call wildlife officer that's on for that particular day. If it's a non-urgent matter, they can call one of our offices. They can talk to many of our customer service representatives.
Which are awesome.
They've got lots of information. They handle tons and tons of calls daily about anything under the sun. And then if a wildlife officer calls you or whatever, we can certainly answer those questions as well.
You guys do a lot of public events too, where you're helping educate people on certain things, right?
Sure. Yeah, we'll occasionally do living with wildlife classes. I did one this summer up at Staunton State Park.
Kids love those classes, by the way. I mean, I did as a kid.
Right.
My kids do. Anytime that there's any sort of interaction with fire department, police, law enforcement, first responders in general, right?
Sure.
And then you mix wildlife in there. It's so cool.
Yep.
I think it's awesome.
We'll go to a lot of the schools and talk with them. And then, if you're just browsing our website, we've got a lot of living with wildlife information on our
You guys have some
website.
Publications too that I think are free, like Colorado. Is it Colorado Outdoors or Colorado Life or something?
Colorado Outdoors is our magazine,
right.
And that's a subscription that you can get. Our website's got more information on that. But on our our main website, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, you're going to have a ton of information, species specific, living with wildlife stuff. If you go
The
to
regs,
About Us there up on the top in the blue,
Yep.
there you go. And then actually go to Learn, sorry, up at the top in the blue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
And
Normally
then,
have somebody on the Google for us.
So learn about wildlife, down in the middle
Okay.
center.
Oh, center. There we go.
There you go. Living with wildlife.
I just clicked one too. Right?
Yep. So we got handling conflict, and we've got how to avoid wildlife conflicts, bears, geese, coyotes.
So start at this website because there's a ton of information on here. This is how you buy and obtain, or this is how I buy and obtain licenses, look at hunting areas. Sometimes I look at the regs on here because I forget to grab one at the gun counter or whatever,
Sure.
you know. So you can get all that information here, and that's cpw.state.co.us. Awesome website.
Yeah, it covers a lot of the basic conflicts that we deal with. I mean, it's not like every year there's a new conflict. You know, it's the same conflicts that occur every single year. And then seasonality right now, right? Our deer and elk are going into the rut, so they're raking their antlers on things. And now they're getting tangled into things. So swing sets and volleyball nets. And
I actually took down our swing set in our yard after I talked to you that time because I never really thought about it. I was like, I know that we're going to have a bull in here
at some
pretty
point.
soon. So, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I had an elk actually got tangled and died in one just the other day. So, yep.
That's a bummer.
Yep.
So I know when it comes to managing big game species and some of our species like bighorn sheep and some of those like iconic animals, that's our state animal, right?
Sure. Yep.
Once you guys start looking at numbers and you see that, hey, a population looks like it's decreasing rapidly, and just to be clear for people that don't hunt maybe, and how sought after that animal is, and how fragile that species line is, I think to hunt one of those things is pretty much a lifetime, right? Like it's a lifetime. You get one chance in a lifetime pretty much.
Not necessarily. There are some opportunities. Like I know a few people that have hunted multiple rams. You can get U licenses actually, every 3 to 5 years usually. Okay. So it's a pretty good option for that. If you hunt, say archery, those are a little bit easier to draw. It kind of depends on the situation, but overall they are difficult to licenses to get. We don't issue a lot of them. Because we don't have a lot of sheep overall. A lot of our populations, especially like on the north side of Mount Evans and along Highway 103 and Highway 5 and Guanilla Pass, those sheep are doing really well right now. We're having a really good recruitment, and so we've actually increased a lot of opportunities for sheep in and around that area. Other areas we kind of just monitor and have kind of stayed status quo for a number of years, depending. But we've got a pretty good grasp on, what all those populations are doing. Those are kind of high priority, high visibility things that we spend a lot of time focused on, whether it be population monitoring, collar projects, so putting collars on, doing site or mark recite population models on those animals, trying to figure out what the total population is, doing habitat projects. I'm working on a big habitat project for sheep right now. We do a lot with our sheep.
So when you say habitat project, does that mean that you're going and improving habitat for that specific species, or how does that work?
Yeah, so, anytime we look at a population, there's a few ways that we can alter that population, right? We can't increase the total number we can't increase the land mass for a particular animal, right? What's on the ground's on the ground. And
it tends to get smaller every year too, right?
It does, yeah, through development, through roads, stuff like that, hiking trails, biking trails. Increased recreation pushes animals out of certain areas, and so habitat's kind of always decreasing, if you will, for these species. And so if you want more animals, we can, if we're going to have the same amount of habitat, the best way to get more animals is to improve that habitat. Much of our habitat overall, I would say in much of our state, is kind of in a stagnant state. We've got...
Plus we've been in droughts and...
Lots of drought.
Yeah.
A lot of our forest fires are really helping to kind of rejuvenate some of that forest component. Increased light to the forest floor increases the food, increases production. There's more water available. Certainly there's some consequences of some of these really large catastrophic fires, especially with water quality and things like that. But I would say overall, fire is a really beneficial thing for the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's super important. I mean, we've
Absolutely.
had a couple wildland firefighters on.
Yep.
Plan to have some more on, and some fire science people in that world. And shout out to my buddy Brandon Dunham that runs the Anchor Point podcast. That was an awesome podcast. I learned a lot on that. But, just talking to them and like, as far as how much it helps, and as a hunter on that burn scar area, there's animals in there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And they love it. It's a good habitat. And I think, if we're able to manage forests like we are wildlife,
Yep.
I think it's going to be helpful.
Yeah, managing habitat and managing wildlife are go hand in hand, and oftentimes we can't burn in and around subdivisions or wherever just because of some of the risks there. So we kind of try and duplicate that by doing timber projects, and so we'll reduce total volume of trees in a particular area, and it essentially functions the same, right? We remove a lot of that wood product out of there, increase light to the forest floor, increases the amount of grass and forbs and shrubs that are coming in there. Things like sheep, they can see further, they can see predators that are coming. So
that makes a lot of
their
sense.
ability to avoid predation by sheep, by mountain lions in particular, increases. And so now we've increased their fitness in the wintertime or in the summertime, depending on where we're doing these habitat projects. And then if a fire does come through, that forest is now much more resilient than it was previous to that. And so now we don't get those catastrophic fires, and fires now kind of going in and just maintaining the existing habitat that's there. The Forest Service does a lot of controlled burns and pile burns and stuff like that to kind of accentuate a lot of the habitat work that Parks and Wildlife does, or even the Forest Service does for those wildlife. And just having a forest that is much more varied than what the current state of the forest is, right? We don't want an even-aged forest stand. We want mature trees. We want openings. We want dense patches. We want maybe a burn. We want a variety of habitat types. Habitat essentially is that component, or it's the arrangement of food, water, shelter, and space. And it's how it's arranged on that landscape. So just because we have a lot of really dense trees, that might be great security cover for elk, but it's not great food or foraging area. So those elk may have to move 5 or 10 miles in order to go find somewhere to feed. So they're probably not going to utilize this particular habitat all that often. But if we can cut openings in there, now we got food next to, preferred shelter habitat, that's going to be much more appealing to things like deer and elk. So
makes so much sense, And one of the points that Brandon brought up in that podcast that we did with him was he was talking about, when we aren't able to manage some of these things and do these controlled burns and stuff, there's so much fuel on the floor that the fires burn so hot, where you start seeing like these firenadoes and like all this crazy stuff that can happen in the middle of a wildfire. But he's like, it scorches the earth so bad that stuff won't regrow then.
Yep.
So there's like a happy medium of like what can actually be there.
Sure. Yep.
But that's cool. I didn't realize you guys took it that far as like clearing vegetation and trees out and stuff to create more vegetation.
Yeah.
And how much does that help? How much does that help that population like right off the bat? I mean, especially getting away from predators. That's probably their biggest thing.
I think improving habitat makes a big difference. They're doing more and more studies looking at fitness of deer and elk. looking at summer forage quality versus winter forage quality. And that summer forage quality they're finding is really tied to overwinter survival, right? If they can fatten up in the summer, their overwinter survival is going to be significantly better than it would be. And, so we often think, well, we need to have good habitat in the winter, which is true, but that summer habitat they're finding is actually, equally as important because that's what helps get them there to the winter. And so, what's beneficial for wildlife is also going to be beneficial for people too, right? We live in and around these communities, and if we can improve the forest health and quality of the forage and the habitat, that's going to help us down the road because, the forest is just going to be that much more resilient to things like wildfire and other things.
That's a great point. I always wonder about those elk out there on the golf course year round.
Mm-hmm.
And all the chemicals that they put down on the golf course to make that grass green and all that sort of stuff. Do you guys ever run into any issues with, do you think that there might be antler deformities? I know some of the deer running around here look a little crazy sometimes, or have these weird growths, and stuff on them. Do you think that some of that might be coming from pesticides or herbicides and stuff like that? Has there been any studies on anything like that?
I'm not aware of anything here in Colorado. I did see a study recently talking about kind of these forever chemicals that kind of exist in perpetuity on the landscape, and in particular, I think this study was out of kind of the Midwest area, and they're seeing a lot of the fertilizers and things that they're spraying on the ag fields out there, that they're seeing that being in deer meat, and like you see like an advisory at certain fisheries where it's got a mercury advisory, pregnant women aren't supposed to consume X number of fish per week or whatever. But the article kind of hinted at that could potentially be a thing for wild game, which is certainly concerning.
There's a ton of wild game on the western slope and out east that eat corn or peaches or whatever.
Sure.
Some of the best bear meat I've ever had came from the western slope, and it was like a bear that ate apricots or something the whole time. It was incredible.
Yeah, I think I think just in general, we have to be wise about what we do to our one thing, because it often has cascading effects on other things.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And I think the perception that I guess hunters are the original environmentalists. They've got an invested interest in all aspects of the ecosystem, not just the trophy elk or deer or whatever. They've got
I would say most hunters do.
The health of the whole forest and the water and the watershed and the trees and the air. I mean, it's all interrelated, and hunters have a really vested interest in all of that.
I agree. Most of the hunters that I know care more about animals than most people that I know that are just, average or non-hunters.
Yep.
It's kind of crazy. We had John Norris on a few episodes ago. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's written a few books, Hidden War. He was a California game warden for California Game and Fish. And became part, he actually had to learn how to become part of the marijuana enforcement team there, because California has this huge problem with cartel grow operations.
Sure.
And it's much more than combating marijuana in general as a narcotic or as a drug, which we've started to accept here in America.
Sure.
But it's more the environmental impacts, right? And I was totally shocked when I read his book a little over a year and a half ago, and then I did some more research on him, and I was honored to have him on the podcast. Just a great human that's now retired and still combating the same problems. But in California specifically, they're having huge problems. And I mean, these cartels are taking extreme tactics, right? Like they're smuggling in across the border, like carbofuran and all these crazy pesticides diverting full streams or creeks and killing fish habitats to water the crops. They're putting this super lethal pesticides that can even kill humans, and it just decimates any sort of wildlife that touches it on these plants to get them to maturity.
Sure.
Not to mention they're poaching. There's just a ton of implications, and they're having a heck of a time stopping these guys because of certain laws that are in place. Like they'll catch it or bust a cartel group. Not to mention these guys are getting shot at. Some of these booby traps are like punji pits from, the Vietnam era.
Sure.
Where like there's spikes and they're putting poisons and stuff on them, hoping that game wardens or law enforcement or even some patrons or just normal people might fall on those before they reach them. So it's just this crazy war, right? It's called Hidden War, his book. And I encourage anybody to go check that out. Great audiobook too. And a lot of really useful information in there, but he's been dubbed as kind of like this earth warrior, and it's more about the environmental impacts that these cartels are having and these grow operations. Do we run into any of that here in Colorado? I mean, it's kind of hard to grow tomatoes here, which, me and John kind of talked about, but I wanted to ask you if you've run across anything like that. I mean, obviously that's a huge market here.
Sure. Yeah, it does happen here. I would say further north you get in Colorado, probably the less it occurs. And I'm certainly no expert on this, but we do run into it. We've dealt with them over by Georgetown. We've dealt with them down Buffalo Creek and Deckers. Wow. I think further south where it's a little bit warmer, you got a little bit lower elevation, longer growing season. Especially some of the southern Colorado, it's much more remote than certainly around here. I mean, there's not too much country around here that doesn't see people pretty frequently. So it's a little bit more of a risk, certainly for those cartels to deal with around here. We did deal with one this spring. And yeah, exactly what you're saying. I mean, diverting creeks, who knows what kind of chemicals you're dealing with, right? And these are bona fide criminals. And so, poaching wildlife, chemicals in waterways, water diversions, they've got massive amounts of money and infrastructure invested in there. And so, the risk to law enforcement or the casual person that happens to be walking their dog and go through this particular area. A lot of our grows are found by hunters because they're off the beaten path. So it certainly is a risk. But yeah, it's not a good situation for sure.
Yeah, no, it scared the shit out of me, honestly, man. I think it's probably the worst thing that could happen to a habitat or an environment. And California is struggling big time because it's not just Mexican cartels now. Yeah. Now it's all these other cartels from other countries, like overseas and stuff, are doing the same thing because of the profit value that's behind a plant, It's just kind of crazy. Do we have a dedicated, like California has a dedicated marijuana enforcement team? These guys are tactically trained. They have air support. They have dogs. They're training with snipers or SEAL teams. Do we have anything dedicated like that in Colorado when you guys do stumble across this, or is this normal game warden's responsibility to go and
so generally
these things?
From a game warden's perspective, usually we're in a kind of an assisting role. We're an extra body on the ground. Generally, these types of situations are handled, the DEA gets involved. The Forest Service, if it's on Forest Service or BLM land, those guys have dealt with lots and lots of these types of grows. But they'll get a lot of their officers from other parts of the state, and they will deal with that. But they also, we deal with the local sheriffs as well. They'll be involved in these situations as well. So it's a kind of a multi-pronged approach with a lot of different entities. Really, Parks and Wildlife doesn't take the lead role. Perhaps if it was on a state wildlife area or state park or something like that. But generally, if there's if it's on federal land, there's a federal nexus, and that's usually going to be the biggest penalty. But most of the time, these guys, these cartels will take off, and a lot of times there's never any consequence.
They're so smart. Like in that book, he explains, that they were putting felt on the bottom of their shoes so you couldn't see their tracks in and out. They had one point where they had made like these cow hoof type things. So, I mean, super smart guys, at averting people and law enforcement for sure. But just no respect for human life, wildlife, environment at all. Like total disrespect. So yeah, I was just kind of curious. I wanted to see what we had going on here. Fortunately, you can't grow a lot here, and you can't grow year round like you can in California. I think that's why they have those huge problems over there. Managing hunters and poachers and all that sort of stuff. What are the most common things that you have to deal with? I mean, there's so many loopholes and ways to get around laws, and there's not really, most of the times that I'm in the backcountry, there's not somebody looking over my shoulder, No. So it's kind of, I would imagine that's got to be a super hard thing to manage.
It is. I mean, we really rely on other hunters to do a lot of reporting through things like Operation Game Thief. That's a big one.
Which is a 1-800 number that you can call, right?
We've got info on our website here. Go to About Us.
Okay.
And then go to law enforcement on the bottom right. Right.
There we go. The other right.
I'm the same. And then over on the left, Operation Game Thief.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yep. But that resource there, not only does it reward folks that report, wildlife violations.
Oh, it does. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you can actually get preference points. So
shit.
That's a way you can get a preference point.
I'm gonna go look into tonight. I'm sure I can find somebody.
But yeah, I mean, we use that. That's a great thing. And hunters are out there. They see things and they know, this is not cool. This is not right. This is beyond somebody taking the liberty and shooting an animal off the road. This is somebody who, we've had a few issues this year where people are literally just cutting the heads off trophy wildlife and leaving carcasses,
Really?
The actual willful destruction of wildlife. I mean, just for trophies, and that's not, those folks need to be held accountable, and those hunters, report folks like that. At least we can start that investigation through that. So that's a huge way that we kind of initiate a lot of our cases. It's really challenging. And I would say the vast majority of folks are honest, law-abiding folks. And if there is a law enforcement issue, it's because they either were ignorant of the law or maybe they just made a bad choice at the moment. Everybody's human. Everybody makes bad judgments from time to time. You and I are not immune to any of this.
I've made plenty of bad calls in my life.
Right. And, but it doesn't make you a bad person, But then there's also that component that is the legitimate criminal component. There may be commercialization.
You're avoiding the law, right?
Yeah. They know darn well what they're doing, and they're trying to be malicious about it and avoid, prosecution and all that. And those are the folks that really need to be hammered. That's.
And what are some? I mean, it probably depends on the severity of the incident, right? But basically, you lose hunting privileges, even some firearm privileges, right, and stuff like that. What are some of the implications?
There's a lot of different kind of sentencing things that you can have. It could be jail time. A lot of times, go to federal prison, even depending on severity of violations. I would say most of our violations are fines as well as points. And what the points are is essentially, it's kind of like a driver's license, but it's just solely about your hunting and fishing privileges. And so if you accumulate too many points over a certain amount of time, it's 20 and 5 years, you can lose your ability to hunt and fish in Colorado.
I didn't know there was that system involved.
Yeah.
I've never been in trouble for anything,
right?
so luckily.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's not only just in Colorado, it's all of the other members, other states that are members of the Wildlife Violators Compact. So you lose your ability to hunt and fish.
So you can't
in
go
Colorado.
state to state. It's going to follow you.
Correct. You also can't hunt in Nebraska or Florida
Wow.
or Kansas. So it's
That's
a
really
pretty
cool.
it's a pretty good deterrent. With that said, you get guys that go to Africa or Mexico or Canada, and they're exempt from that. So that's how a lot of these guys are getting around it. But that's a kind of a high dollar deal.
Right. This kind of brings up my next thing, because I've introduced a ton of people to hunting in the last couple of years, and some of them aren't. I don't want this to come off the wrong way. They're just not educated.
Sure.
Right. They're not going and reading the regs. They don't know. They haven't grown up around it. I just want to make it very clear, and I want to ask it to you. Say you do harvest an elk, a deer, kill. You can't turn around and sell any of those parts, like for market, right? Like you can't make a profit on. You can't put the rack on Facebook and legally sell it, can you?
There's certain things you can and can't do. Okay. So like you could sell a rack, you can't sell meat. So generally, inedible portions. So things that are not the edible portions. So meat, you're not allowed to sell because that's what created a lot of the market. Mm-hmm. Things like antlers, the hide, those things you can actually sell. When it comes to other animals like bears or bighorn sheep, they're much more restrictive on what you can and can't sell.
So it goes by the species.
Same thing like with a lot of our fur bearers. So bobcats and coyotes and beavers and fox. Those are all hides that like with trapping or any of our fur bearer seasons, you can keep the hide and sell those hides. And so it's kind of a weird deal because, right, when you allow the legal sale of certain things, it creates a market for things, and then it creates incentives for doing certain things. And
that's how you get the stock market guys hunting.
I know, right? But same thing like with like the antler trade. Antlers are legal to pick up and sell. And it creates this market for things, and it starts getting people out there to picking up antlers that maybe wouldn't otherwise pick them up.
Which
unless
is why there's
financial
a season on shed hunting now, right?
Yeah,
probably.
Yep. So it's, that anytime you create a market, there's consequences. There's unintended consequences of having that market. There's a lot of.
Well, and I think the biggest issue with that too would be the black market, right? Because that's what truly encourages poaching for the most part, like people going after ivory. I know black bear gallbladders are highly sought after in certain countries. I don't know if we have issues here with that, like people poaching bears specifically for the gallbladders, but
sure. Yeah, we certainly have.
Yeah.
So,
because I had somebody say, well, if I get a bear tag, can I just turn around and sell the gallbladder? No, you can't, right? Because that would be part of the meat source.
Yeah, and it's specifically listed in our statute because we know that's an issue. So that'd be illegal sale of big game, which is a felony. So it's a big issue.
Yeah, no, that is a big issue.
Yep.
So where would you find out, I guess, if you did want to take something to market, how do you find that information out? Is it on the website?
It is. So
I always just call you. I feel bad sometimes.
Right?
Like I called you about my dog the other day because I want we just had a dog trainer in on the podcast, and I'm going to get her trained to track, but I want her to track human scent.
Sure.
But I've thought, man, if I ever shot like a buck or a bull or something and couldn't find it, that's like my worst nightmare, right?
Sure.
And pretty ethical when it comes to it. So hopefully that doesn't happen. It has happened to me before, where I've looked for days and haven't been able to find something. But I thought it would be cool. Like, I have this dog with this ability.
Sure. Yeah, we've got in our regulations, we've got, we've literally addressed all of these types of situations.
Yeah.
Even dogs that can track wounded wildlife. We've got a specific set of laws that address that and how that can be done.
Thank you for sending all that to me, by the way.
Sure.
Too. You sent me all the literature. I was like, oh, this spells it out right here.
Yep.
I guess I could have just looked myself, huh?
Yeah. So under our law enforcement tab, so go to About Us,
Mm-hmm.
and then hit go to Regulations.
Okay.
Third one down.
Yeah. God, I need glasses.
Right. So this has got all of our wildlife regulations, and then on the far right, you'll see Colorado revised statutes. It says C Title 33 Wildlife Parks and Recreation.
Okay.
That's another website that will get you to the statutes, and then we've also got regulations. So statutes are things that are set by the legislature, and then the wildlife regulations are set by the Wildlife Commission. Statutes generally are much more broad, so like kind of the big topics, like you have to have a license, you have to wear orange, you can't trespass, like kind of the big picture things. Mm-hmm. And then regulations are all the details. So like, a season date for elk is this date to this date. Like the legislature doesn't care about that. That's kind of out of their wheelhouse. And so our Wildlife Commission votes on the regulations, and that's much more specific to kind of the nitty gritty of what's, really going on. But those are the two locations that you would look for the actual verbiage, right? Our wildlife brochures that we publish. So if you're hunting big game, you'd pick up the big game brochure. That's going to have essentially the summaries of these two items. And so, what I use is these two things because this is like the books.
That's the law book.
These are the law books. Yeah. This is the exact wording.
And you can pick those up just about anywhere. I mean, you can go to Walmart and get one. Yeah.
Yep. So, the reg books are a great summary of all of the laws that we talk about. But if you ever want to look at exactly what the law says, those are the two resources that you go to.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm learning a lot today. I want to go back to this Operation Game Thief because you guys actually have an email there. So you can email or call. And that's game.thief@state.co.us. Or the number, if you want to report a wildlife violation, is 1-877-265-6648. Or it's 1-877-COL-OGT for Operation Game Thief. So that's awesome. I'm going to earn some preference points.
Right?
I don't know. I don't run into it very often. What I do run into is ignorant hunters. I shouldn't say ignorant, but uneducated hunters. Mm-hmm. Some of them tend to be out of state. I'm running into hunters more frequently now in the past couple of years than I ever have. And I mean, there's times where I'm 6, 7 miles back. I kind of keep that range because I know that the situation for me to get an elk out from the backcountry that far in it's a lot of work, right?
Oh yeah.
And you have not a whole lot of time depending on weather situations.
Yep.
I mean, obviously if it's cold, I'd risk taking a shot, 7 miles back in. But like this year I was by myself, so I kept that range between 3 and 4 miles if I was, from a vehicle to where I could get that to a freezer someplace, right?
Yep.
Because that's super important to me is not wasting anything. It's actually part of the law, isn't it? Like
Absolutely.
You have to take a certain amount of meat and you can't let it go to waste, right?
Yep.
So part of that is not only getting it out, but not letting it spoil in the back of your truck, basically, right? Because then it's ruined. So I've just noticed, the increase in hunters. Have we seen a huge influx in people hunting or hunting for the first time? Are you guys running into that a lot? And
we're seeing a lot of that. With COVID, everybody was outdoors. I mean, everybody went outdoors because there was nothing else to do. And I think people found this kind of empowerment of being able to go get your own meat and being a little bit more independent and self-sufficient. So we're seeing large increases in the total number of people. And, Colorado's one of the few places you can go and get an over-the-counter archery tag or over-the-counter second or third bull tag and have that opportunity. Whereas a lot of states, you've got to apply, and there's a good chance you may not draw even every other year or every 5 years or every 10 years. And so Colorado's got, we probably...
ton of opportunity for out-of-state people.
Tons of opportunity. I mean, we've got more elk in Colorado than all the other states have. So we've got tons of opportunity. And I think there's more, especially with social media and different podcasts, more and more non-hunters.
Yeah, we're probably a culprit of that a little bit.
But people see hunting and fishing, which is great because we've got more advocates for hunting and fishing, and they understand kind of the mindset of hunting and fishing and want to experience that connection with the outdoors more so than just watching wildlife. They want to interact with wildlife. That's one thing that I enjoy about hunting is that I'm literally interacting with the wildlife, and I'm able to feed my family. So that's one of the things that I really like.
That's why I enjoy it.
But we do get a lot of these folks, if there's no cap on the licenses. So we have a lot of opportunity, a lot of people that are in the woods. And a lot of folks, especially if they come from, another state that maybe doesn't have elk, maybe they never packed an elk out or, seen how truly large an elk is. And so they have this perception.
Just field dressing it is a task.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
You're by yourself. Have a
sore back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. I mean, it's something where, I talk to hunters, and I ran into a bunch of folks in the backcountry this year, some of these backpack guys that were even further in than I was, and I had horses. We're seeing fewer of the younger generations with horses, I would say, just because a lot of us, grew up in more urban areas. And so a lot of it's this kind of backpack remote do it yourself.
And that's become so popularized too, like just on social media. I mean, when you have bow hunters like Cameron Haynes and John Dudley and stuff that have millions of followers, that's how many people that they're influencing, and I love those guys to death. They're awesome. They're great people. But
I just think it's important for a hunter, especially somebody who's never done it before, to kind of put that experience into a little bit more perspective. Go get some sandbags at the hardware store and strap them onto your pack frame. You strap 80 pounds on your back, which in some cases isn't even a hindquarter on a bull.
That's not even a hindquarter on a bull, yeah.
And the difference between a 4x4 bull and a 350 class bull is like double. Those animals are massive animals. And you think, okay, I've got 4 quarters, I've got all the neck meat, I've got all the back straps, I've got all the tenderloins, I've got the rib meat, I've got the head and the antlers. I mean, you got probably on a big bull, you might have 25 pounds of antler plus the actual head. So that's another 50, 60 pounds. I mean, you're packing out a ton of weight.
And that's what you legally have to pack out. I mean, there's guys like me that will take the hide and rib meat and,
heart and liver and all that stuff. And, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of stuff that you got to take. Not only that, you've got your camp and your bow or your rifle and all of your personal effects.
You're talking on a bull, it's at least on foot, at least at a bare minimum, 6 trips. Bare minimum.
Yeah. If you're 7 miles in, that's 14 miles round trip times 6.
You basically have 24 hours, right? Yeah. That's how I look at it anyways. I mean, you might, with weather, you can get away with a little bit more if it's cold.
Yeah.
But typically during archery season, when I hunt, it's not, man. There's days where it's like, there's been days where I've been at, 13, 12, 5 and had my shirt off because it was so damn hot. I was dying. It's like,
I just think hunters in general just need to keep that in mind because I ran into a lot of hunters and I talked to them this year. I was like, have you ever packed out an elk? Have you ever seen an elk that was actually dead or seen an elk quarter? And a lot of it was, no. And, one group I was talking to, I was like, you guys are, 9 miles from a road this way. 8 miles from a road this direction. Like, what's your strategy if you would kill an elk here? Well, I don't know. We'll figure it out later. And that's not a good mindset to have, because, I mean, that would make me sick if I knew that I lost half that elk because I didn't prepare ahead of time, And maybe that's having a few buddies on standby or calling
That's huge. Having a group of people helps tremendously.
Even one or two other guys it's a huge, huge help. But, calling an outfitter and seeing if an outfitter can be available to help pack out an animal that's available there, because it's our responsibility to get that meat out.
There are ways to rent horses and stuff. You don't have to own horses. I mean, there's a ton of guys on the Western Slope that make a living off of renting hunting horses.
Yep. And it's encouraging to see folks that want to get out and do it the right way and, hoof it and work hard and try and get an animal. But it's also our responsibility as hunters to make sure that we can actually get this meat out. I think that was much more evident this year than probably any other year that I've been working or hunting, was the amount of folks that were probably too far from a road than they probably should have been. So that was a bit concerning, I think, at least
I ran into a couple of things, and I don't even know if I should bring it up on the podcast, because it was something that disgusted me during this hunting season. There were some out-of-state hunters in a unit that I was in. It was an over-the-counter unit, and I actually heard this through a third person, so I didn't talk to the guy directly. But the people that I were talking to were pretty cool people, Colorado people. We were camped next to each other. I'd been around generations bow hunting and stuff like that. And these out-of-state guys had shot a bull. Is there any sort of laws on the ethics of where you shoot an animal and how an animal's life is taken? If as long as they have a hunting license and are meeting all the regulations with a proper bow or rifle or whatever of the right caliber or speed on a bow, right?
Yep.
Outside of that, is there any sort of laws? Like, is there? Because basically, I'm just going to tell you this story.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys were back. The elk are, there's hunters everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The elk are pretty spooked. It's super thick in these areas where the elk are at. This guy crawled into some oak brush, and the only thing he saw was the two back legs, and he shot the elk through the Achilles tendons. It's not funny.
Yeah.
It made me pissed off. And then they tracked the thing for like 3 miles. Thank goodness they found it and the thing actually bled out. But what a horrible way to die. And then, not to mention, at the same time, I'm thinking, what if those were my legs?
Right.
Or my son's? Or, what if that was a moose?
Well, and if that's all he could see, how does he know he was shooting at a bull? How is he shooting at a cow? That's a classic sloppy move and very unethical and
arrogant
and frankly careless.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good to hear, and I would say that is the exception rather than the rule.
I hate telling that story because it gives hunters a bad name.
Totally.
Like 95% of the hunters that I know firsthand are livid or pissed off about it.
Yep.
So
yeah.
I tell them this.
Yeah, that's not a common thing, I would
Mm-hmm.
say, and I deal with tons and tons of hunters every year. The vast majority of the stories I hear of a situation where, it was like 95% perfect. It just wasn't quite. There was one little stick or one little thing,
Mm-hmm.
and the hunter was like, no, I'm not going to take that shot because I don't want to wound that animal. Our goal, every hunter's goal should be a clean one-shot kill where that animal dies quickly and basically as painfully or painless as possible.
Mm-hmm.
None of us, I certainly don't want an animal to suffer. And the killing part of hunting is just a necessary part of the hunt. Just this, like if I'm going to consume that meat, an animal's going to have to die, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just It's a reality of life. Things die constantly, whether you're a hunter or not. You want to get your cereal out of the cupboard. Guess what? Animals died for that cereal, because as you're plowing through those
That's a great point.
Those wheat fields, animals are physically dying. And so just because you're a non-hunter or a non-meat consumer doesn't mean that you're not killing animals directly. As a hunter, I want to know where my meat comes from, for one. And to me, if I can have any sort of control on the outcome of that by practicing shooting my bow and training and being physically fit, all of those are going to help me be more successful as a hunter, but also they're going to help me to be more humane when I do shoot that animal. And
it's honoring that animal's life is the way that I look at it.
Absolutely.
Because that's why I shoot my bow year round. That's why I put in the time.
Yep.
That's why I'll fill my 6-gallon water jug full of water and hike some trails in the summer.
Yep.
Yep.
I think that's the message that needs to get out to hunters, is that, one, it's okay if you don't fill your tag. Like, you don't have to fill every tag, and not every hunter is going to fill his tag. And just because
the success rate is like, what is it on elk?
Yeah.
Here.
It's like 10%,
That's wild.
10%.
Yeah.
And that's...
I feel pretty lucky.
Right?
Yeah.
You can certainly improve that through the different things, and I've certainly been more successful than that, but I've also put in a lot of effort to do that. But a hunter should not compromise their morals in order to try and be successful at something.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you're either successful because you've done it right, or
which feels way better, right?
Yeah, or you didn't kill, but you did it right, right?
The worst feeling that I've ever had is actually shooting an animal not in the right spot, and then having to figure out, okay, now I got to put another arrow in this thing, or what am I going to do? How am I going to find it? That is the worst. That keeps me up at night. Yeah.
And any hunter that's hunted for any time is going to have to deal with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not perfect. We're not robots, but it should be our ethic to, do as good of a job as we physically can and honor that animal's life, both by, utilizing that animal's meat and killing that in the most humane way that we can, quickly and efficiently. Mm-hmm. So clean one-shot kill, that's my goal every time.
But for this particular instance, there's no legal implication for that, right? I mean, it's...
Yeah, you could potentially go down the road of a careless hunting, so something that could potentially endanger life or property. It's kind of a tough one, definitely a tough one. And that's a struggle, is that there is no perfect laws for a lot of these situations, because... people could make a mistake and hit an animal in a bad location. You can't necessarily punish somebody for wounding an animal. Certainly intent does play a role, but there's not really a law that addresses that. But yeah, if I talked to
it was something that upset me. I mean, it upset me for 2 or 3 days afterwards.
Yeah, if I talked to those hunters, I would have given them a pretty strong piece of my mind.
Well, I did.
Yeah.
When I saw them coming out with that last quarter, and luckily they packed out the meat and stuff. And
sure,
I mean, from Alabama, they didn't know any better, but I wasn't happy about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, man,
well, at least that's the minority of situations.
That's the first time I've ever had anything like that really happen. For the most part, guys are, I was out solo this year, and 9 out of the 10 people that I ran into were like, "Hey, are you by yourself?" "Yeah." "You?" "Yeah." "Well, if you get some down, let me know. I'll come help you." Or that.
Absolutely.
It's that sort of mentality,
Yep.
And I don't know. You can kind of tell. You can kind of tell when somebody's new at something or doesn't care.
Sure.
You can definitely tell when they don't care, and that's what ticked me off about these guys. So.
Yep. Well, hopefully won't be in the sport for very long.
Yeah, I hope not. So, yeah, that was unfortunate. So yeah, moving on to dealing with this influx. What do you think is the best way for people to get educated? Like, there's no real, you can't go out and take a hunting class, really. I know that Colorado Parks and Wildlife actually offers some like first-time hunter programs or something like that, but it's not like something that everybody can take.
No,
right?
we certainly can't accommodate everybody, but there are some novice hunter programs. We do some like elk hunting 101s. I mean, there's a million YouTube videos on field processing and elk, stuff like that.
That is one good thing about social media is some of these influencers like Cameron Haynes, I think, is very transparent with what he uses, his process.
Sure.
And showing his process.
Yep.
And
cool. I think just trying to experience that, like, Google, how much does an elk quarter weigh? And put that on your back and go hike up a hill and say, can I do this for 15 miles or 20 miles? Like, you'll have a whole different perspective on what you physically are capable of doing and understand, actually, I probably need to limit myself to just a couple miles from the road. And you can kill elk there. Just because you're...
Sometimes there's more elk there than there is 7
there
or 8
is.
miles
I think a lot
back.
of times those animals will kind of hang by the road because everybody hikes past them. So there is some validity to that as well. But I think just understanding where your limits are, and you don't want to push your... Or you don't want to find your limit when the moment is most critical. You got to push yourself before season and understand, hey, this is my limit, and understand where your boundaries are.
And that's exactly what I do with my hunt every year. Like I go and shoot my broadheads religiously for like a month before. In August, I start shooting broadheads.
Yep.
And
you probably shoot them further than you would in a hunting situation because you're honing those skills, and then you're like, okay, I feel really confident shooting at 70 or 80 yards, but I'm going to limit myself during hunting season to 50
Not
or
to
whatever.
mention you don't have the same adrenaline. There's that whole factor,
Yep.
So yeah, I limit myself to about half the range of what I can comfortably shoot at on a pretty flat range. Now I go up to some 3D courses and get...
Sure.
I think that's a big mistake too that I would urge anybody that's listening to this and thinking about getting into bow hunting. Maybe you live in an urban environment and you don't have a lot of places to shoot.
Yep.
Shooting 20 yards in your backyard or at an archery range that's perfectly polished concrete, that's perfectly flat.
Yep.
There are so many more variables that come into it that you will never experience at an archery range.
Yep.
Unless you're shooting like a 3D course. And I'm fortunate that I have access to an awesome range up here at American Bowman. I know you guys do some classes up there. Great people that run that spot. And actually, this just reminded me, if somebody was wanting to get into archery or to figure out, maybe not even archery, just hunting in general, and wants to figure out, how much an elk quarter weighs, they're starting to have some competitions. This Western Hunt Challenge. I forget. It's some sort of organization. I think they're on Instagram. It's just Western Hunt Challenge. If you Google that, I think they have a website. But part of the competition is shooting, and it's shooting at, like a 3D course and some real life hunting scenarios where you're shooting downhill, uphill. The foam targets are actually the size of the actual animals generally. I mean, pretty close to it. So you're shooting at life-size elk or moose or caribou, lions. But then also part of this Western Hunt Challenge is they have a solo backpacker. So you have to shoot in your backpack rig. It has to weigh a certain amount. I think it's like 40 or 50 pounds or something. And then you have to hike the terrain. You have to do it in a certain amount of time. And then part of that is, I don't know if they go as far as field dressing, like cutting stuff up, but part of it is a pack-out challenge.
Sure.
So you actually win a trophy or a belt or something. I haven't participated in one, but that's kind of cool. It's a good way to like go and try something before you put in a real life scenario, and it's done on time. It's a competition.
Yep.
Kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, it kind of goes to the fact that hunting season isn't just a 1-week event. Like for me, it's a year-long process.
Me too.
And most of the process of that year is training to shoot and shoot well, and then the other part of it is to be physically fit and make sure that I'm physically capable to get in and around where the elk are at, because elk are training all year long to go up those hills. And if I'm sitting on the couch eating Cheetos all day, I'm not going to be able to do what I really want to do. So it's, whether
point.
it's, running a 10K at the park on a Sunday or going on hiking hills or running with weight or just, packing weight and lifting weights, whatever. You're all training, and that's part of the reason why I do all of that. Not only for my job, I need to stay physically fit for my job, but when I'm out in the field hunting or patrolling, I want to be able to be,
at your best.
Yeah, exactly. And
no,
I
that's
think
exactly why I do it. That's why I stopped rolling jiu-jitsu
right
in the summer, because I don't want to hurt an elbow or a shoulder, because that bow hunting's that important to me.
Sure.
And there's a running joke in my hunting buddies and my family. Actually, a lot of my hunting partners are my brothers and uncles and stuff like that. So it runs. We've been hunting for generations, which is super cool, because I not only do I have what I've learned, but I have all that previous knowledge, man.
Sure.
And to have that is so valuable. But I always joke, when September 2nd rolls around, or 1st, or whenever the hunting season starts, I always joke, we only have 13 more months until next hunting season, guys.
Exactly.
Like, we better get together.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I did it. We'll bleep that one out. But that's always my running joke, It's
Yep.
They're already preparing for next year, and this season's not
Adam
even
Sandler,
over.
364 more days till next year's elk season, right?
Yeah.
Hockey season.
Just taking the hockey pucks to the chest.
Yep.
That's a classic, man.
Yep.
Love those movies. So, one thing that's come up that I've helped a lot of guys with this year, that had some animals down, is, I'm kind of old school, and I always I think the rule used to be you had to put the tag on the antler, right?
A lot of states, that's the way it is, and I think that's pretty common. A lot of folks will do that here in Colorado.
But from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, you specifically want that tag in with one of the quarters of meat, correct?
Yeah, the best way to do it is include it with the carcass, because oftentimes the head or the cape or the antlers are going to go somewhere else, to taxidermist or wherever. Meat may go to a processor, or you process it yourself. Carcass tag needs to stay with the carcass, which generally put it on one of the hindquarters. If you've quartered it, put it on the hindquarter that's got the evidence of sex, and then you meet both those requirements. Your carcass tag's been voided properly. It's properly attached to the animal.
Signed, punched.
Yep, signed, notched, and detached. And then you've got evidence of sex on that quarter, so we can identify, yep, this did in fact come from the right species or sex of the animal that's on your tag. And then if your taxidermist needs to see something, right, you've got the top portion of your license that you can show that taxidermist for their records or whatever, saying, yeah, here's my actual license, and they can make a photocopy or whatever they need to do for their records. And then if you take it to a processor or you process it yourself, that carcass tag's going to stay with the meat. And I tell folks that carcass tag needs to stay with the meat until that meat's been consumed. So I've got a little...
Yeah, I got Ziploc bags in my freezer. I probably need to go clean them out. There's probably some tags from last year, and most of those are gone. So
Yep. But that's the easiest way, and it's a super simple process, easily avoid any sort of legal ramifications if you just do it that way. And it's easy.
Yeah, that was something I just wanted to bring up, because it's something that I run into with some of these newer hunters that I've helped out. They're like, what do I do? Like, how do I?
Yep.
Okay, I got it done, but now, now what do I do?
Yep.
So yeah, as far as people, there's a ton of people that don't hunt.
Yep.
There's a ton of people that are just out recreating, backpacking, dealing with wildlife. For your non-hunters, just trying to out and enjoy stuff. What are some of the common mistakes that you guys see there when it comes to dealing with wildlife, or predator encounters, or anything like that? And what do you want people to do?
I would say the biggest thing is people get too close to wildlife. People, whether it be a hiker, a biker, or a dog walker, any of these types of folks that may not be, active hunters, they see wildlife, getting too close to the wildlife, and now that animal's starting to change its behavior because you're there, That's going to be your first clue. And so a lot of times people don't notice those first clues, and then it ends up resulting in somebody getting run over by an elk or trampled by a moose, something like that, because they've missed those cues, that the animal's trying to tell you, right? He can't talk to you, and most animals aren't going to verbalize, hey, get away. So if those animals even give you any sort of perception that they're aware of you, so you walk by and they pick their heads up from feeding, okay? Now you've entered into their space where now they're aware of you, right? So you should take that as a clue of like, hey, this animal's aware of me. I need to start kind of, at least my presence is changing its behavior at that point, okay? That animal might square up to you. It might pin its ears. It may do anything. It may move away. But it's starting to give you clues that you're at least within its bubble. And so, that's probably the point at which, hey, I need to kind of go off or give this animal a little bit more space. In most cases, you're probably not going to have any sort of interaction, but even just walking by an animal, that deer picks up its head, it looks at you, right? It doesn't like that. Its heart rate's probably going to elevate. It's going to have some sort of physical response to your presence, even though you may not ever see it. We've done, maybe not us, but other groups have done studies on some of these elk that have been, especially elk that are giving, calving, where they're being disturbed by things, people hiking or biking or
boom boxes,
anything as they're walking through these areas. We have known elk calving, and too many disturbances on these elk calves are resulting in mortality of these animals. So you're physically not shooting an animal, but your actions of being present in and around where an animal is given birth is having a direct result in population level declines. And we're seeing that like Vail in particular, Vail Aspen area. I know they're seeing a lot of impacts to
I
some
would
of the elk
imagine
over
we
there.
have it around here in Evergreen. I mean, there's not a lot of habitat. I mean,
Yep.
Luckily there is not too far from here. There's some, why am I drawing a blank? State wildlife.
Yep.
Is it refuge or not
So
refuge?
we've got a state wildlife area that's closed.
Areas,
Yeah,
yes, closed certain parts of the year for that reason, right?
Yeah, it's closed during calving season for that reason, and in the winter for protection of winter wildlife habitat. But we're finding that more and more kind of that just general recreation's having a much bigger impact on our wildlife populations than previously thought. But that's one of the reasons why. And so, when you're in and around prime wildlife habitat and you see wildlife, just giving that wildlife much more space, even if it's not fleeing, if it acknowledges your presence, right, we need to give that animal space and kind of move on, enjoy it.
And I think be patient with it too. I mean, that's one thing that I've noticed around here, because I'll go out and photograph the elk in the morning, but I'm doing it with, 500 mil lens, and there's guys that will walk up with their cell phone to some of these bulls,
Yep.
Which, they're putting themselves in danger. And not to mention that you're ruining it for every other photographer that's there.
Yep.
Because now you're in the shot, it's like, but yeah, I think it's just respecting them and being patient, if you're on your mountain bike or something. I've seen people yell at animals.
Yep.
I've seen people, elk in the road, and people are laying on the horn like it's a New York taxi cab. It's not.
No.
No,
it's about coexisting with wildlife,
Right.
not the wildlife is living in your world kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, this is all of our worlds, and that elk has just as much right to be where it's at as I do, and we're going to live and interact and try, and I'm going to give it space and it'll give me space,
No, I think that's super important. The next thing that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, is there any sort of education on what you can do to avoid hitting animals? Because recently in the area, we've had some like multiple car pileups with elk. And I mean, you guys do a great job. And, Jefferson County in particular, the sheriff's office puts up these big billboard signs that are like the flashing tickers, that say, watch out for elk. There's signs everywhere. if you're a local, you know that they migrate across the road all the time.
Yep.
Typically if you're driving at night, they're pretty much a black animal. I mean, a super dark brown, but at night they're hard to see unless you're looking for eyes or kind of know what to look for.
Sure.
And then obviously if you're speeding, good luck stopping. I mean, we've had some pretty horrific accidents just this year.
Sure.
What are some things that people can do to avoid that? I mean, is there anything that you guys are working on to help educate people on?
So we're looking at, we do track roadkills. I've got an app on my phone that whenever I come across roadkill, I'll log it in there, and all of our officers will do that same thing. And so we get pretty good information of what's being hit and where it's being hit and time of year and all that stuff. And that all goes in. And we've actually got a wildlife movement coordinator who that's her full-time job, is looking at wildlife movement across the state, and so we have local issues and then we've got statewide issues, right? And so oftentimes, there's a lot of concern or uproar in one particular location, but when you look at the big picture of things and you realize, hey, we had 6 elk that were killed on Evergreen Parkway, which is a bummer without a doubt. But then you look at the entirety of 285 from Morrison all the way to Bailey, and you've had 50 deer killed. Like, that's a bigger issue, right? Or some of these other stretches in the western part of the state. Highway 9 used to be a horrible one, and they've since built overpasses and underpasses and some fencing along there.
Yeah, there's some of those like wildlife corridors now, right?
And so they've really cut down on the total number of vehicle collisions there, right? Those are tremendously expensive, and so from a statewide perspective, they're looking at prioritizing where at in the state do these make sense, and so that's kind of the we look at it at a big picture level, right? Mm-hmm. We can't look at it at a local level and have each little local area working independently, because, funds are only, you only have so much, and we want to prioritize the best projects in the best habitat to help address the biggest populations or the most at-risk animals. And so not every area can be dealt with. And that's a common thing that's brought up, especially with Highway 74 here in Evergreen, is we do have vehicle collisions. But when we look at the vast majority of the vehicle collisions in
the grand scheme of things, it's not.
It's a little drop in the bucket. Granted, every animal we would prefer not to get hit, but we got to kind of prioritize where are we going to put these different projects.
Sure. And I guess my question wasn't so much about that in particular,
sure,
about building one of those over 73. That would be huge, right? That's
sure,
the main artery into here. Cost a ton of money.
Yep.
I'm sure. But I guess more, is there some sort of education, like, there's a driver's ed course. Is there any talks about incorporating some of that? And I don't know, I haven't taken driver's ed in
sure
30 some years, right? So
yeah, I couldn't tell you what's being taught in that. I think that's a good idea. The biggest thing is speed.
Get off your phone.
Distraction and speed are the two biggest factors. I mean, if you're heads up, you're alert, you're not intoxicated, you're scanning the roadways, you've got decent lights, it's pretty easy to see something, or at least have that idea. A lot of times folks will see one, but they don't think, okay, there's probably another one behind it or on the other side. So, but probably speed is the biggest factor, and just slowing down in the evenings and just kind of being cognizant of, hey.
Or when you do see one, like, don't keep going and think that you can make the gap, right? Like, I always come to complete stop, and then, I think something that we've kind of lost up here is that it used to be the old school, like, give you a little headlight flash if you saw a police officer or elk or deer or something. And it was and it's funny because I've done that now during the day, and I've had people, send me a gesture back.
Sure.
Like, I don't know, it must mean something somewhere else, in New York or something.
Right.
But yeah, I think, back in the day, that was something that was pretty relevant to go ahead and give a little flash of your lights to let somebody know that there's something up ahead.
Sure.
I wish we could bring a little bit more of that back. And then when I do see something, I come to not a complete stop, because that's not entirely safe too, right? To just stop on a 55 mile an hour speed zone and
Sure.
complete stop unless you absolutely have to, but slow down enough to where if something does dart in front of you, you have enough room to stop.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that those are big things. Well, shoot, man, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. We've been in here for 2 hours,
Sure.
believe it or not,
Wow.
and we've covered a lot, and I know that you're going to come back. So anything that you want to close with before we get out of here? Or?
No, I appreciate you having me.
I always enjoy having you.
Looking forward to the next few seasons. Hopefully we'll get some good harvest on deer and elk, and hopefully you'll be able to get some critters too.
Yeah, man. I'm hoping next year will be more successful than this year.
Right.
But I had a great time regardless, man.
Good.
It's always the
Good.
best time. And then at some point, man, I don't know if you guys do it, but I would even enjoy just coming and spending an afternoon with you. Do
Sure.
a ride along or something would be cool.
We could do that.
Just hang out with you outside of here.
Sure. We'll definitely
All
do
right.
that.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Go check out cpw.state.co.us if you need any information on wildlife laws, safety, all that sort of stuff. You guys are also on Instagram. There's a bunch of Instagram pages, but the one that I think has the most stuff is CPW Wild Talk. That's what it is. So yeah, go check those out. Give them a follow. That's a great page. You guys post photographer stuff from all over the state. It's kind of cool. So yeah, go check them out. Give these guys a follow. If you see a game warden, be nice to him.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Mountainside Podcast. If you haven't had a chance to do this already, please take a moment, follow, like, subscribe, or rate on whatever platform you catch the Mountainside Podcast at. Also, if you'd like some more information on upcoming episodes, safety tips, access to all of our affiliates, and all the badass discounts that we get here at the Mountainside Podcast, check out themountainsidepodcast.com.